Welcome to I'll Have You Know, a podcast from Rice Business. This episode is part of our Pivot series, where guests share stories of transformation in their lives and careers. Krissy White has always been willing to take exciting risks, and in doing so, led her to some of the most rewarding experiences life offers. The former collegiate swimmer talks with us about her recent dive into entrepreneurship as a second job. The executive MBA doesn't shy away from taking on challenges of any kind. She talks about her journey to the opposite side of the world while sharpening her teeth in the hospitality industry, her voyage back home, and pursuing a career as an executive vice president of operations in the legal field, and most recently, pursuing her passion for pastries with the love of her life. Our guest today on I'll Have You Know is class of 2023 Executive MBA, Krissy White. Hi, Krissy. How are you?
Hi, Maya. I'm great. Thank you.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. You have just been out of the executive program for a year now. How has it been? How has this year been that you're not hitting the books?
It's funny when people ask me, what do you do with all of your spare time? And I'm like, I don't think that I was ever taking time that was spare, but it's been great, actually. So my husband and I have an 8-year-old daughter and a 5-year-old son. And so I promised myself that I would spend all of the time that I was with school now over with them and their things. And that's been a lot of fun. And then professionally, we will get into this, I'm sure, but we'll be expanding Magnol French Baking to the second location in the winter of 2024. And then I have my other role as director of operations that is going well also. So really finding ways to use what I learned at school personally and professionally, I think.
So you went from being busy to being busier, right?
I guess when you put it that way, it's probably pretty accurate. Yeah.
Let's go back in time a little bit. So you graduated from Northeastern University in Boston in 2006, and your focus was the hospitality industry. And that was really what your passion was. And you started at the St. Regis in Florida in '07. Tell me, first of all, a little bit about your background and where you grew up and why you decided to go to Northeastern and what led you to the hospitality industry.
Yeah. Well, oh gosh, I haven't talked about this in a long time. So I grew up outside of Boston, about 30 miles north of Boston, almost into New Hampshire. And I decided to go to Northeastern because I was a collegiate swimmer. I was a competitive swimmer that had been given a little bit of a scholarship to go and continue my athletic journey there. And upon entering, I suffered an injury, so that's kind of what led me to that school. But I also wanted to live in a city, and Boston was the closest one. So that's what led me to that school. It was unique, that experience, because they spend 1 year going to school full time. And then every year thereafter, of which there are 4 more, so it's a 5-year program, the students spend 6 months going to school and 6 months working full time. So you can test out what profession you think might work for you. So I tried radio DJ. I tried a whole bunch of different things. By the time I graduated with a communications degree, I didn't really know much about the hospitality industry at all, but I found it somehow. And then I decided, all right, well, if I'm going to go into this, let me find the best in the world. Who's the best in the world at this? Like, let me surround myself with that. And
Go big or go home, right?
yeah. So my younger brother was living down in Fort Lauderdale at the time, and there was this hotel that was opening. It was in the pre-opening stages, and it was the St. Regis in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And so I applied as an operator, like answering the calls from outside and answering the calls from inside when the guests would call down and they needed something. And that was my first job in hotels. And then I had a pretty unique experience working there. I worked there for about 2.5 years. And then the hotel was managed by the St. Regis. hotel company, which was connected with Starwood. The gentleman who owned the asset of the hotel decided I would like a different brand to manage my hotel. And so the St. Regis was out and the Ritz Carlton was in. And I stayed along for that transition. And then about a year later, I was interested in other opportunities. And the Ritz Carlton, being such a big company and owned by Marriott, opened up a lot of possibilities. And there was another new hotel that was opening in Charlotte, North Carolina. So I put my hat in the ring for that. And that became my first manager leadership role to move up to Charlotte.
So you went from literally fresh out of school to boom, manager.
Yeah, I was in a supervisor role, but I mean, I've just always felt like leadership is where I belong. Like when I was really young, I mean, like young teenager, as I mentioned, I was a swimmer. I learned about this opportunity, which I laugh about now that I kind of like had this instinct to do this and then ended up at business school, right? But I was a swimmer and I was like 13 or 14, and the board of New England Swimming said, well, we need an athlete representative. And I'm like, that sounds like an amazing opportunity. And so I got to sit in on board meetings every month. And I just thought it was the coolest, most exciting thing. And even as like a young, very young adult. So yeah, I loved the fast paced nature of hotels. I loved it. It didn't really matter how much, I don't want to say how much experience you have, but it's kind of like if you're able to have your skills and your experience and your knowledge suit that environment and you really tap into all that emotional intelligence, then you can just be so wildly successful. And it was so fulfilling. It was incredibly fulfilling to manage a team, to interact with the guests with their very high expectations and try to meet and exceed those expectations, set up processes to make sure it was consistent, and all of those things fit in with the Ritz Carlton really, really well. And so, actually, the hotel up in Charlotte that we opened was like an all star team. And the Ritz Carlton, since they're a global organization, they have all of these ranking systems for, well, which hotel in the world is doing the best according to guest satisfaction surveys, like at this part of the experience, at that part of the experience. And the hotel I was working with was number one, like off the charts in all of these categories. And it was just very exciting, very high performing team. And yeah, my first opportunity to manage a team of about 50 employees. But then actually, I decided about a little over a year in, okay, this is very fulfilling professionally. But personally, I just feel like I've been dedicating everything to my job and my career. And is there anything more to it than this? Like I should feel more complete by now, right?
Something was missing. You felt that something was missing.
Yeah, I did. And I decided, well, maybe I take myself off of this. I don't want to say like treadmill. I'm not sure which metaphor to use, but when there's kind of a plan that's set out for you in certain industries and you can stay on that path and you'll know exactly what the next step will be. I felt like I don't want my life to feel so predetermined.
You wanted to jump off of one train and get on another.
Yeah. So I had always wanted to live in California, and not just California, but in San Francisco. And I don't know why. Maybe it's because I'm from the Northeast. And so it's total opposite. And I'm like, that sounds like the best idea ever. I applied to go work at the Ritz Carlton in San Francisco, like in the actual city on Nob Hill. And they were looking for a job for like a VIP club lounge manager. And the executive that was hiring for the role said, well, you're great, but you've never been here. And we need someone who really knows this city well. My wife is the executive in my role at the Ritz Carlton in Half Moon Bay. So they have the same position open. Why don't you interview down there? And I thought, oh, well, okay, sure, that's fine. So I did. And I saw pictures of this hotel and I was like, oh my gosh, I mean, this is just
Stunning.
And it was the same role. And I thought, okay, yeah, this is great. I can still live out in the world, in the land of wine and all great things that I know very little about. So I got that job and I moved out there sight unseen, except for the internet. And then in my sort of orientation class was this pastry chef. And I'm like, ooh, he's cute.
Oh, right. No, I know where this is going. I know where this is going.
Yeah. And like within a few, I don't know, how long was it? I mean, I don't know, 8 weeks or so. We had met and moved in, and the rest is history. Yeah, the rest is history. And that's my husband, Otto. So he was the executive pastry chef at that hotel, and I was the club lounge manager and later became the front office manager there. And so yeah, we had just had like a beautiful beginning to our story together out there. It was the most magical place. And so we decided, okay, well, should we like have a baby or should we move to another country?
Like, I don't know,
Those are like
Dubai? Like,
yeah,
let's go
because
to
those are like the
Dubai.
only two logical options of things we could do next. So we said, well, let's go live in another country because we're never going to have another chance to do this. And so he got a job working at the Burj Al Arab, the big, fancy, well known hotel. And then I secured a position in the front office with the same company, Jumeirah, that was based there. And that was a well thought out decision because I thought, well, I don't want to move to another country and then work for an organization that is based in the US because I would like to have the most authentic experience possible working there. And it was amazing. It was just, I mean, personally and professionally, like eyes wide open to the way that others live and eat and speak and behave, and expectations are so different.
In the UAE for sure. Yeah, for sure expectations. It's a very, I mean, obviously it's a different culture, but the expectations for sure are, it's not as laid back, I don't think, as some places here. I think the expectation of service is a different league.
Yes, no doubt about that. And the guests are coming from all over the world. I mean, I had experience with that, but not at this level where guests would come and they were not interested in speaking English. They would speak whatever language they were most comfortable with. And so we would hire employees depending on like the vacation schedule of people from around the world. So in the winter time, it was a big time for Russian guests to come and visit because of, I think it was a Russian Orthodox, some kind of holiday. So we would hire more Russian speaking agents to assist them. And I had just never seen service be so tailored to, I mean, down to the extent that you're speaking, the mother tongue of the guests that are coming through.
That sounds incredible to be able to have that opportunity. And yes, you can certainly have a baby at some point, but this is something that you certainly needed to get underneath your belt before you decided to start a family. And were you looking worldwide, or was this really a place that you had pegged that you and Otto wanted to go?
Oh, that's such a good question. We learned that for hospitality, every city other than Dubai wanted you to have previous international experience. And so Dubai was kind of the gateway to being able to live and work in other countries. Where we had our eye was Vietnam, Singapore, and we were told, well, you need some more experience for that. And so we put in our year and a half or so in Dubai, and both he and I had these opportunities beyond sort of as a next step there in Dubai. And my mom was quite ill. She was going through some treatments for things here. And I remember there was this one phone call, and she's like, I'm okay. I really, let's just talk later or something to that effect. And I was like, yeah, she's not okay. And we shouldn't be over here anymore. I mean, we were kind of looking for, should we go home and start a business, or should we stay out here on the road forever until who knows when? And it was sort of a sign, I suppose. And we said, okay, let's go. Let's go home. So we came back to Houston. And at that time, we're back in Houston. My mom, thank God, she's well now.
That's good. It's good.
Yep. And my husband, he starts to receive all of these messages on LinkedIn. Hi, this is the take your luxury hotel in Singapore and Vietnam
Uh,
and all these places. And we're like, oh no.
that time had come, right? It was like, now
Yeah.
Asia is ready for you, but you weren't ready for Asia.
Yeah. Maybe later, Asia, because now we're doing this.
So you moved back here to Houston in 2014. And so what happens next? So you decide that maybe now's the time to start a family.
Yeah. So we moved back here to Houston and I thought, well, I have all of this experience with high expectation guests and satisfaction surveys, and the medical hub of the world is in Houston. So surely this will be an easy transition for me into healthcare. And everyone in the hospitals was like, you're going to need to start right there at the beginning. And I was like, for the first time in my career, I was like, I can't start over again. I have international experience. Like, there has to be something more. So an acquaintance of through my husband, a friend of his, was saying, well, I work with this company called LegalEASE and it's growing pretty quickly. It's a personal legal insurance company, like a voluntary benefit through your HR. And they just acquired Google as an account, and they need someone who understands how to speak to a diverse group of people with high expectations to go out to Mountain View and speak to them and convince them to sign up for this great benefit. Would you like to do that? Because we don't currently have someone who can. And I was like, yeah, that sounds interesting. Sure, I can do that. I'm not doing anything else right now.
I love that. You're just, you know what? Absolutely, I can do that. But I'm not starting from the beginning in the Texas Medical Center. Like, no, negative to that one. I'll pass.
Yeah. I really wanted to, like, the common thread with the hospitality and Magnol and all of the insurance company I've been working for since then and to this day and still working for now has been, I just, in my own way, want to help make the world a better place. And I would love to be able to feel like I'm doing that on a daily basis. And now I'm like in senior leadership. And so there's a little bit less connection with the actual member that we're helping, but it's still there. And I'm able to make bigger differences on a larger scale and work with a pretty large team here of about a little over 100 team members. And then, of course, when I'm over at Magnol, being able to speak with the guests is, I mean, the best part.
So let's back up to Magnol, right? So you've got a full-time job, you've got babies, and then you've got this amazing husband who's this top of the top pastry chef and all of those things. And it's like, hey, let's open a bakery. Why not? Right. So you decided with Otto to open a bakery in 2019, right? Right before COVID.
Yes, right before COVID and 6 weeks before our son was born.
Perfect. I mean, why not?
Yeah, well, so ever since we met back in California, he had this cooler, this huge igloo cooler, and it was full of like molds and stuff. I'm like, what is all that? And he's like, oh, this is for when I open my business someday. And I was like, oh, okay, sure. And it's just, I mean, he is an immigrant and I mean, the work ethic, whew, he's from El Salvador. And so we go down and visit once or twice a year with our kids. They feel very connected to that part of themselves and their family. And he's the only one in his family who ever left. And he just knows what he wants. We knew we were coming back to Houston to open a business, and we didn't know exactly what type of business it would be. In his field, usually someone is very skilled at chocolate or bread or sugar work or pastries, but he made a point of preparing himself so that he could open whatever was needed when the time came. And so the first question that he went and asked his chef friends that he had known for so long after really spending a lot of his youth, he came here at 18, 19, was to ask them, so where is the hole in the market?
What's missing? Sure.
And they said bread.
They were right.
So he said, okay. And so he was working at a French restaurant called La Table here in the Galleria. He worked there for about 3 years while we prepared and figured out, business plan and where are we going to get the money to do this anyway, and all of those important things to start a business and tax ID and all the basics. And I kept working here so that we could kind of, my daughter was about 1 or 2 at that time. And we were like, okay, let's diversify our risk a little bit. My background is in hospitality, but we need health insurance and all of these other, which is a big part of the entrepreneurial conversation. I've heard people say, like, if you have a spouse that, or a partner or whatever the situation is, that you're able to kind of diversify the risk so that that person can really take their chances and fly while you have something that's a bit more stable over here. That is the, I think, ideal. It can be done in many different ways, but that has worked for us so far. So, we're preparing and going to banks. We decided we don't want to take on any investors because we would love to maintain creative control and equity of the company. I mean, I would see my husband like go from one potentially amazing opportunity to another potentially amazing opportunity in California and Dubai, and within a short period of time kind of watch the light dim a bit with him feeling like I know what I want to do. I know what I'm capable of doing. I know what the guest wants, but there are other factors at play. And I would love to have the creative control to make all these decisions. And so I agreed, yes, let's try to maintain creative control and equity as long as we can.
And freedom. I mean, that's what you're talking about, is to have the freedom to make it your own. I mean, I was an entrepreneur and I didn't want any partners at all. I was like, nope, I don't want to have to get buy-in from anybody else. I want to be able to do this. And it's also, it's about being able to pivot quickly and to make decisions quickly and not have to go through a whole bureaucracy.
Oh, it's so true, and it's such a technical job that our team does. There's so much time spent in them perfecting what they're doing and learning and investment in making sure they understand why things need to be done a certain way and so on and so forth. So yes, we were able to get things going, and we decided that back in 2018 or so that we would open a wholesale bread bakery so we can sell the bread to restaurants.
Well, that was a big pivot then, because that's not what it turned into being.
No, and no, it never actually ever started that way at all because we selected our location with that in mind, which is why we're at the location that we're at, where we get asked that pretty often. Why are you out here in Spring Branch in this industrial area? And we're like, well, because it was never really intended to be a retail location. But the moment we started baking and nearby neighbors would come and smell the bread baking and they were asking, so where can we buy your bread? And we're like, well, it's one moment. And went and purchased the little square that you hook into your phone. And we're like, here, it'll be $3.25. And they were like, sure, that sounds great. And we said, well, we'll start croissants and viennoiserie in 6 months. And like 3 weeks later, we're making that and selling that, and it just really took off from there. But like you said, that was May 15th of 2019. Our son was born July 9th of 2019. That was a hard summer. And then came COVID about 6 or 7, 8 months later. And we used that time to, well, like a lot of businesses, create the online store, find ways to keep things running. And we also used that time to expand our little storefront into a larger space, given what the demand had been that we were so fortunate to be on the receiving end of. And when we came back from COVID, I mean, our numbers continued to rise through COVID. And then after that, it's been the same story. We're just so grateful and so fortunate for the reception that we have gotten from the international community, from the Houstonian community, from like way outside of Houston, where people will drive for hours and say, well, I made the trip. And I mean, it's so wonderful. So that brings us to kind of where we are today, where we go between 20 and 25 team members in size. We are still working with restaurants, but I would say that it's probably like a 70-30 split, 30% restaurant revenue and 70% retail, which we did not see coming. But like everything that you learn in business school, which was so reassuring, it's about adapting. If that's what the customers who are going to be willing to pay for what you make, they want it in that format, then give it to them in that format if you can, even if it's not ideal, even if you didn't have a team in the front that was expecting to have, 150 people show up at 7:30 in the morning. Do the best you can with what you have and just listen to what the guests are saying and adapt as quickly as we can. And we've continued to reinvest almost all the profits back into the business, which is how we're able to expand and move into the heights, which is going to just be a super exciting project, and we'll start construction on soon.
So you opened this phenomenal bakery and recognized the demand. It was an unmet need. Like not only was it bread, but it's actually like people really wanted a bakery specifically like the one that you created, right? In the midst of all this, you're like, I'm going to go to business school and get my MBA. So tell me that thought process.
So I will say that it was my husband who was like, man, you're already doing something to the effect of you're doing so great, but you could really take over the world if you had your MBA.
$100.
And I was like, yeah. And I always had it in the back of my mind. I never considered myself a student because in my younger years, I thought that the grade equated to being a great student. But I learned that.
Like taking it back to the board meetings that you were in when you were 14.
So I said, yeah, you know what? You're right. But it would be crazy to do that right now. And my husband's like, well, it's not going to get any less crazy than it is now. I mean, if you were to do it now, they're all so young. They may not even really realize that they're with a babysitter they love and my mom who lives with us, who they love. Like, you're not missing games, you're not missing recitals. So I went online and it was 2020, 2021. I'm like, well, okay, it's COVID time. So maybe again, with this theme of like, what's the best in the world? I'm like, maybe all business schools are online right now. So I'll apply to like Harvard and Stanford and all these schools. And turns out that actually you do have to go on campus. So I was like, yeah, maybe not. But then I researched what is the best MBA in the country for entrepreneurship. And they're like, oh, Rice University.
Here you go.
And I was like, what? No. In Houston, right here? So I applied and I was like, this is such a long shot. I mean, this is Rice University. And after I went through my interviews and that whole thing, I remember receiving the email where it said, congratulations. And there's like electronic confetti. And I thought, oh my gosh, I did it.
Well, but you did the first part. You got in.
I know. So I remember saying to my husband, I got in. That's all I really wanted, like that confirmation that I was good enough to be accepted to this program. So I don't really need to like go and do this because that was enough. And he was like, I don't think so.
Now you're going and you're going to have to put in the blood, sweat, and tears.
Yeah, you're not getting off the hook that easily. And oh my gosh, I remember he dropped me off on the first day and I like went to the bathroom and like crying. Well, what am I doing here? And I just can't even believe that they picked me. This was a huge mistake. It was such a transformative experience for me. And people say that, and God, it sounds so cliche, but I mean, honestly, the imposter syndrome that I now recognize that I like self-diagnosed myself with, where you have this long list of like achievements and things you've worked hard for, and it has resulted in a certain level of success. And you're still standing there feeling like other people are better, smarter, this, that, or the other. And out on,
Are they seeing through me? Well, which is interesting because your whole life and where you've come from and how much you've achieved. It's fascinating to me because it's human nature. You've achieved so much and fresh out of school, you're in the supervisory role and you've been across the world and you've accomplished so much. You start a business and everything else. And then you get there and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can do this because part of the program is such an introspection of yourself that it makes you pause and it's like, who am I? Sort of, you know?
Yeah, and who am I now?
Who am I
Uh,
now? Yeah.
Exploring that identity, because at the same time, he's gone from chef to, I mean, he'll always be a chef, but he's a business owner now. He's a businessman and making all the business decisions and solving all of those things. There's just so much growth happening all around us. And the time that the RICE program took to help us students walk through that process and understand, like, well, that parts of who you really identify with, maybe who you were. And maybe some of them will come along for the ride moving forward, but maybe some of them not.
You shed some of that because what it does is it takes you on this journey of learning not just, I mean, about the folks that you're with, but about yourself. And also the best part is that part, well, what I really enjoyed is really delving into the case studies of those businesses and those individuals that failed, right? That really made some significant mistakes. And guess what? They survived and they thrived.
Oh, it's so true. It's funny that you brought that up because yeah, I think for those who have a high performing or high potential or whatever term you want to use for people that like to try hard and accomplish things, that
Perfectionists?
yeah, that there's this kind of, it's not a dark side, but it's not the most maybe healthy or positive thing that you start to think, well, maybe I just won't start something that I'm not totally guaranteed will be successful to the level of success that I hold dear. And so I just won't even start because I don't want to take that chance. And that's not the life worth living.
So circling back to quite the pivot story that you have, and it's been a fascinating one, and I've really loved hearing all of the really fun twists and turns on your journey. And the fact that rice has been a part of this story, and that I think that from what you told me, rice was really the part where you were the most nervous, which is interesting for me because you've accomplished so much. But because I think that there are lots of people that might be considering taking off on this opportunity and taking this step and making this journey that already have leadership skills and have already, been very, very successful in their life and even opened their own businesses. What words of wisdom, of rice owl wisdom, would you give someone that is considering this program?
The first most tangible one would be to attend those free, I think they're 30 minutes or 45 minutes long. It's like an intro to the executive MBA program or to the MBA full time or online MBA program that Rice runs, where you can listen to those who have been through the program before and get a lot of questions answered. I remember listening to one, and for me, I attended the one where it was full time working parents who were considering going through the program.
Yeah. They do such a great job with that of really tailoring it to anybody who has, this drive and has this consideration that like something's missing and I need this piece. And they really tailor it to anybody. Like if you're willing to do the work and if you're willing to take that jump and that risk, you can do it.
Hmm.
To summarize, right? In terms of the RICE program, what have been the most fulfilling parts of it for you?
I mean, definitely the friendships that were formed with those that you really pour into and that others are willing and ready to pour into as well from areas of the world that I never would have met otherwise. But also for me, the end of the program international trip, our class went to Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. That was a profound experience for me.
Tell me about that. Tell me about that experience.
Well, I wasn't going to go. We had a death in the family a few weeks before, and I have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old in the bakery. And I was like, I'm not going. Clearly, I can't go. I am far too busy, too many responsibilities. This isn't a good idea. And everyone in my life, in the office, my husband, everyone was like, you should really consider going. And I was like, no, 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 that's just not going to happen. And then the class before ours, some representatives from your class came and they said, well, this is how it is. And it's a lot of fun. Ha ha ha. But also, it's, the most amazing thing ever. And so I said, you know what? I think I'm going to go. And everyone around me was like, yes, yes, good idea. And I mean, I was like a mess getting on the airplane. Like, never left my kids. We're just like,
To go to Rio, I mean, that's a good place to go, right?
yeah. And I mean, was traveling with a whole bunch of my classmates, and it was the first time in just years that I mean, I have two little kids at home, and it had just kind of been one thing after another. Like, I had my daughter, and then my dad had passed away in kind of an untimely way a few months later. And then we had some infertility issues, and then my son came, and then the business. And I mean, it was just a really long couple of years, but I never looked at it that way. You just keep going because you know where you want to be and you're just going to get there. And it was the first time that you're in another country. You're with all of these people that some of them you've been able to become really friendly with, some of them not because of life here at home. And there's just like this distraction free environment. There's no dishes to do. There's no laundry for 9 days. There's nothing. And the school sets up all the transportation. You don't have to worry about where you're going, how you get there, how long it's going to take. You're just like along for the ride.
I think a lot of the program at Rice, the issue is that you go in expecting one thing, and it's not anything that you've ever expected, and it exceeds every expectation that you never knew you had.
So well said. Because when we started off with accounting and finance and all of the important fundamental coursework in the first semester, I thought, yeah, this is okay. This is what I signed up for. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm like,
But I'm going to figure it out.
yeah. And then everyone was saying, well, after the first semester, there are some different, it's not so quantifiable. And I was like, okay, that sounds hopeful. To go in thinking that you know what the program will be for you is being far too optimistic about what you think you know about what it will be like. And a lot of it isn't about the coursework so much. A lot of it is about the conversations you have when you take a break and you go down and get your iced tea and your granola bar and you're speaking to someone else in your class and you come back and you're like, wow, okay. Like, I wasn't expecting, I didn't know that person had all that going on or that they had come from this circumstance and now they're doing this. And just exposure to people. And I mean, in that way, I suppose it reminded me of my international experience because it is such an international, diverse class. Just the sort of realignment that we all have our struggles, and it's not a competition about who's have been more challenging, but just that shared experience in life of it's not easy sometimes, but maybe what's hard for me isn't so hard for you, and we can help each other along in that way.
Yeah, it's definitely it's hard to explain, right? That's why it's one of these things that we talk about on I'll Have You Know that the common thread is that you go in thinking one thing and you come out on the other side completely transformed in ways, like I said, that you had never ever envisioned or imagined. And it really does prepare you for the next chapter in your life. It's hard to see that when you're on that side of the bridge. But once you cross the bridge, it's like, man, I can't even imagine not believing that I should have, or like not even having just a bit of doubt. Like, there's no doubt, absolutely did the right thing. And you know what? I got to meet you.
Mm.
All sorts of silver linings.
So true. And it's been great because actually, when going through the program, you're so wrapped up in how you're going to make this work with yourself, your job, your family, everyone, that I didn't create the opportunity to meet too many of the students that were the year ahead of me or really behind me. But now that I've been out, I've been connecting with a lot more of the classmates, like through the WhatsApp chats. And you were so kind to invite me to the Children's Museum annual fundraising lunch. And I got to meet several more there. And then the alumni weekend. And I mean, these are all things that are right in our own backyard. They're not challenging to get to. It's just a matter of prioritizing those relationships. And it's just like the learning and the relationships, and they just continue. I mean, it's not limited to those who are in your class.
100%. And once an owl, forever an owl. Well, Krissy, it has been a delight to chat with you and learn more about your phenomenal journey. And I really do look forward to the next chapters in your life. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Maya. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening. This has been I'll Have You Know, a production of Rice Business. You can find more information about our guests, hosts, and announcements on our website, business.rice.edu. Please subscribe and leave a rating wherever you find your favorite podcasts. We'd love to hear what you think. The hosts of I'll Have You Know are myself, Maya Pomeroy, and Scott Gale.